Hello again to another Agakala React, and today we will be watching how the assembly cut fixes Alien 3 from Kyle Warren. So I watched Alien 3 multiple times. I wouldn't be able to, definitely more than 10, probably more than 15 times. I really like that movie for some reason. I'm not sure which cut did I watch because I watched it over the years, so obviously. I did watch one of the director's cuts when it's longer, so it made more sense as well. But when I was watching it first time, I enjoyed it anyway. So let's just jump in and see what was the differences.
Pay close attention to this scene from Alien 3 and see if you notice anything odd. If you haven't seen the movie, the characters, including Sigourney Weaver's Ripley, are trying to capture the alien xenomorph that's been killing their group one by one. And this is the moment where they succeed, by trapping the creature inside a storage vault. The only thing is, this isn't how it actually happened in the movie. At least, not in the version you saw in theaters.
Well, yeah, I haven't seen it in the theaters, so
version, the characters
that's
don't
a really
actually
good
capture
shot,
the
though.
alien. Their plan completely fails, and the creature escapes.
True.
So, where did this scene come from? It's actually from a different version of Alien 3, called the assembly cut. And it isn't the only difference between the two cuts. For example, in the theatrical version, the alien is birthed from a dog, but in this version,
it's in both of them. Yeah, it's
an ox.
Yeah.
And there's even one character who had a much bigger role in the assembly cut, but he was almost completely cut out of the version that made it to theaters. So, what's the deal with all these changes? Why were they made in the first place? Why is it called an assembly cut and not a director's cut? And could this alternate version actually
maybe that's why actually not director's
Alien 3 that made it to theaters? Before we get to that, we have to explain why these changes were made. It should be obvious at this point, but fair warning that this video will spoil both versions of Alien 3. In short,
well, I've seen it, so it doesn't spoil anything.
Making Alien 3 was kind of a show.
Yeah, I hear about that too.
Alien 3 had a troubled production from the very beginning. The movie went through multiple scripts and multiple directors for years before it finally landed in the hands of first-time director David Fincher. He had the difficult task of following James Cameron's Aliens, which had been a monumental success and amped up the action and bombastic elements of the series.
Get away from her, you bitch!
But Fincher was more interested in making something closer to Ridley Scott's original Alien, less a roller coaster thrill ride and more of a claustrophobic slasher movie set in space. The problem is, the studio, 20th Century Fox, mostly wasn't on board with Fincher's vision. In the words of producer John Landau,
as a studio, we set out to make a release date and not make a movie.
That essentially describes the whole production, which started shooting without a finished script. It went months over schedule and millions over budget. Even the release date got pushed back twice, first from the summer of 1991 to Christmas of that year, until it finally released on Memorial Day weekend of 1992.
For the last time.
Alien 3.
That version, however, was finished without Fincher's involvement. He got to the point where he was so frustrated at Fox's meddling that he walked out of post-production.
It's amazing to me that Fox is the #1 studio in the country because they're all such a bunch of morons.
The movie didn't do bad per se, earning $160 million worldwide on a reported $50 million budget. But even though everyone admitted it looked good, the story turned everyone off. From critics,
this is probably the best looking bad movie I've seen in a while.
to Alien alumni like James Cameron.
I think they made a fatal mistake in killing off Newt, Bishop, and you fight so hard for these people to survive.
Yeah, that was the problem. I remember because when I watched Alien 3 first time, it was on a television like back in 90s. I was still a kid. So the problem was when you're watching something on television, you can't really choose what you want to watch. It's just you have to choose if you're gonna watch what's on the television. So basically, I haven't seen Aliens before that. I've seen Aliens after I watched Alien 3. This is maybe this is why I liked it the third one so much when I was younger. And I still like it, by the way. So like, so you when you're following, obviously, if you see Aliens, and then Alien 3, you do know kinda. So, yeah.
And then you go to the next movies, you know, and then but they're all dead.
And even Fincher himself. No one hated it more than me. To this day, no one hates it more than me. We'll never know what Alien 3 should have looked like had Fincher been allowed to complete it as he originally intended. But we can get a better idea of his final vision, thanks to the assembly cut. Like I said before, the assembly cut didn't come from Fincher. It actually came from this guy, Charles de Lozerica. You may not have heard of him, but if you're even a casual movie fan, you've probably seen his work. He's the guy who spearheaded several of those behind-the-scenes documentaries you find on DVDs, including the ones for Blade Runner, and of course all the Alien movies. While putting together the 2003 Alien Quadrilogy box set, De Lozerica discovered an earlier cut of Alien 3 that had a number of extra and extended scenes that weren't in the theatrical cut. They couldn't get a hold of Fincher to agree to make a director's cut, so instead, De Lozerica and his crew decided to make this cut of the movie as presentable as they could, by inserting deleted scenes, re-recording unusable dialogue, and even adding in effects where necessary. The result is called the assembly cut. But even that label isn't exactly accurate either. The term assembly cut usually refers to an initial cut of a movie that's often 4 hours long, before the filmmakers whittle things down to a more standard runtime of about 2 hours. But the Alien 3 assembly cut isn't quite the same thing, and De Lozerica mentioned he didn't choose that name either. So here's how he described how to think of this version of the movie. I think that what we have done is to capture a snapshot of the film in the state it was in before it really got interfered with in post-production, before it got taken out of Fincher's hands. What you're seeing is a reconstruction of the direction the film was going. So, this is the first cut of the film after development hell and after production hell, but before post-production hell. In other words, the assembly cut isn't the definitive version of Alien 3. It's not even really a director's cut, as Fincher claims he's never even seen it. But it's safe to say it's closer to Fincher's true vision.
I always thought that there was director's too. That's why I said in the beginning that I watched it, but obviously I must have been mistaken.
Than the theatrical cut is. So is it better than the theatrical cut? Or is it still a mess of a movie, just with different problems? Let's break down both versions and see for ourselves. The biggest change between the two versions is the one I opened the video with, the outcome of Ripley and the prisoner's plan to capture the aliens. In both versions of the movie, the group intends to spread flammable waste throughout the facility's vents and then ignite it to flush out the xenomorph and trap it in a storage area. And in both versions, the alien ambushes them and sets off the explosive material early. But while the alien gets away in the theatrical cut, things play out much differently in the assembly cut. Here, one of the inmates, Junior, played by Holt McCallany, sacrifices himself by luring the alien into the vault, where it gets trapped. And in my opinion, the movie plays out better with this change. This not only gives Ripley and the prisoners a much-needed win at this point in the story, which has been basically non-stop terror and bleak nihilism for over an hour, it also nicely ties into the movie's theme of redemption by having Junior, the inmate who tried to rape Ripley earlier in the story, sacrifice himself for her and the group. But the assembly cut enriches this theme even more by what happens in the next handful of scenes that aren't found in the theatrical cut. especially the ones featuring Galek. Galek, played by Paul McGann, doesn't have much to do in the theatrical cut. He's the first prisoner who sees the alien and survives, but no one but Ripley believes him.
got slaughtered like pigs. It wasn't me.
Then he gets a few lines right before the alien attacks Clemens, played by Charles Dance, in the infirmary, but then he completely disappears from the movie. In the assembly cut, however, his character gets more screen time. 9 minutes in the assembly cut versus 3 minutes in the theatrical. Yeah, I counted. We learn the other inmates don't like Galek and think he's crazy. He seems to be ostracized from the rest of them.
Galek is just another poor, miserable, suffering son of a bitch, just like you and me.
Except he smells worse.
And he's crazy.
And it turns out the experience of seeing the alien had a much more profound effect on him. After the group captures the alien, Galek escapes from the infirmary and actually lets the alien go from its vault. And then it kills him, naturally. It's a much more interesting arc for the character. Galek appears to worship the alien, which adds to the religious imagery and themes throughout the movie. And it ties into the movie's message on what true selflessness entails. Throughout the movie, we see Ripley and other characters either being selfish or only caring about a certain group of people to the exclusion of others. But I think the movie's message is that redemption can only be achieved by looking out for everyone, not just yourself and one or two others. This idea gets emphasized in another scene in the assembly cut, in a conversation between Dylan, played by Charles S. Dutton, and Ripley.
What's wrong with that?
Well, nothing's wrong with that. Except a lot of innocent people will die. I thought you were a religious man.
You don't understand. That world out there doesn't exist for us anymore. We've got our own little world out here.
The prisoners looked out for each other, but not really for Galek. And that's what eventually caused him to go insane and release the alien. Their lack of empathy for a fellow human being ended up costing them. All of this nuance is lost in the theatrical cut. In a savvy editing move, they removed the creature's capture, Galek's betrayal, and a handful of other scenes without losing too much coherence in the plot. But the movie definitely lost some of its depth.
Very direct.
Making big cuts like that is part of the process of editing, but smaller edits can also have a big impact on the movie. Take this scene early on in the assembly cut. We match cut from this beautiful shot of some prisoners closing a door to Clemens opening a door. Superintendent Andrews, played by Brian Glover, greets him, offers him coffee, and all appears pleasant before...
Listen to me, you piece of Screw with me one more time, I'll cut you in half.
But in the theatrical version, it's edited differently.
I can't join you. I have a previous engagement.
Listen to me, you piece of Screw with me one more time, I'll cut you in half.
Instead of the build-up to Andrew's outburst, the movie smash cuts from the previous scene into the middle of the next scene, discarding the initial interaction between Clemens and Andrews. It's a good example of the trade-offs you make depending on how a scene is edited. On the one hand, that smash cut is effective at keeping the pace of the theatrical cut churning forward. But on the other hand, the assembly cuts version gives us a much fuller picture of the dynamic between Andrews and Clemens. And that characterization of the inhabitants of the prison is something that the assembly cut massively improves upon. After all, it's 30 minutes longer than the theatrical cut, so it lets us spend more time with the cast. For example, Clemens gets a different introduction in the assembly cut by being the one to find Ripley outside the facility.
The beach scene set up these inmates and set up the environment, and the fact that the doctor was a loner and that they used like Stone Age type gear, while those scenes at the front were invaluable to the And to see her brought into the place, you saw what it was like. You saw all these bugs and all this other stuff that was... It just set the whole place up what it was.
Plus, since the movie sets up that the inmates have taken up religion, unlike in the theatrical cut, in the assembly, we get to see them, actually practice that religion. We get multiple new scenes of Dylan leading the inmates in prayer. And there are fewer jarring edits. When Dylan and Ripley have this exchange in the theatrical cut, here's what the movie cuts to.
What about the others? Where are they?
Pray. I have a problem with this.
What part?
And in the assembly cut, here's the new, more logical cut.
What about the others? Where are they?
Pray.
You believe in this heaven?
This extended focus on the supporting characters also addresses one of the big criticisms of Alien 3, that the cast is mostly a bunch of bald, white English guys, so it's tough to differentiate them. That really becomes a problem in the third act, when we barely recognize any of these characters we're supposed to be rooting for. It's still a problem in the assembly cut, to be honest, but less so. For example, the inmate who almost ruins the plan to kill the alien is a character we've never seen before until now in the theatrical cut. But he actually gets a small moment earlier in the assembly cut when he stumbles upon Golic returning from seeing the alien. Now, I've mostly been pointing out how the assembly cut improves on the theatrical cut, but it's important to note that not all the changes are good. In fact, there's one big one that I think the theatrical cut handles better. And it has to do with the big man himself. So we all know that every Alien movie tries to come up with a new spin on the creature. In Alien 3, we get an alien that resembles more of a wolf or a cheetah rather than the mostly bipedal variations in the first two movies. That's because in this movie, the host the alien comes from is not a human, but an animal. In the theatrical cut, it comes from one of the inmates' dogs. But it wasn't always like this. In the assembly cut, the alien came from a dead ox? Now, that may sound off at first, but it does make sense. In the new opening scene of the assembly cut, we see oxen being used to pull Ripley's crashed EEV off the beach. And using an ox as the sacrificial animal for the alien has some nice parallels with how oxen were one of the animals ancient cultures sacrificed to the gods. It's another thread in the religious symbols woven throughout the movie. But ultimately, I think the dog host is a smart change. It's tough to reconcile an agile alien coming from a slow creature like an ox. And plus, in the assembly cut, the ox the alien bursts out of is already dead. Ignoring whether that makes sense from a lore perspective, it's much more disturbing and upsetting to see it burst out of a live, suffering dog. That said, I do love this edit that matches the shot of the prisoner's upraised fists with the image of the alien's extended mouth, as if both humans and alien are in solidarity together.
Amen.
While the theatrical cut's brutality in this scene definitely makes it better, I do think it overdoes it in another part of the movie, Ripley's sacrifice at the end, when she falls into a furnace to kill the alien queen embryo inside her. In the theatrical cut, the queen bursts out at the last minute, as if it's sensing its imminent death and making one last desperate attempt to survive. It's definitely a cool shot, and the furnace does look better in the theatrical version, but to me, it unnecessarily takes the focus away from Ripley. This moment isn't just about killing the queen. It's a farewell to a character who's finally accepted death and is ready to move on, at least until the sequel 5 years later. The theatrical cut puts more emphasis on the queen than on Ripley. The assembly cut removes the queen's escape attempt and restores the focus to where it should be, on Ripley's solemn sacrifice. I never felt it was necessary to show the creature. I said, whatever happens, she has to be in peace at the end. It has to be a sigh, rather than gritting teeth and sweat. So, when we compare the two cuts, how do things shake out at the end? The theatrical cut does have a better introduction of the alien by using a dog as the host, and a number of its editing choices are kind of brilliant in how they remove extra scenes without making the story incomprehensible. But the movie really benefits from the added runtime in the assembly cut. The successful capture of the alien and Gallic's later betrayal deepens the stakes and the themes of the movie. The supporting cast get more individuality, and the movie ends on a much more solemn note, without that exploitative shot of the Queen's premature birth. All in all, the assembly cut, despite not being a perfect movie nor a perfect recreation of Fincher's original vision for Alien 3, is the superior of the two versions. That's all from me, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know, as I like to delve into more alternate cuts of movies. I definitely plan to do the rest of the alternate cuts in the Alien series as well, but if there are any other movies you'd like to see videos about, let me know in the comments. Until next time, adios.
I wonder if all of them have alternate cuts. That would be kind of cool thing to watch, you know, like watch one and then second one, just see comparison and things like that. Anyway, like I said in the beginning, I really liked Alien 3, no matter which one was it, because I haven't seen Alien 2 at first, so I didn't know about Newt and Hicks and, you know, all things like that. So, yes, I didn't miss them. Maybe that's why I liked Alien 3. So, yeah. Do you like Alien movies? What do you think about Alien 3? And did you see the theatrical cut or assembly cut? Because I was thinking of the director's cut, obviously I didn't. So I must have seen the assembly cut, because there was definitely an arcs in the beginning and some other things as well. So yeah. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye!